Hello and welcome to Bolivia. This video is the first in a series of videos that I'm doing from my tour of Bolivia from 2017. I flew from the UK from Manchester via London, then Madrid, before arriving in Bolivia into Santa Cruz and flying to the city of Cochabamba. Cochabamba was the starting point and is at an altitude of 2,558 metres above sea level. That's about 8,400 feet. So the first day was acclimatisation only to get used to the altitude. The next day we went to see Bolivia Motors to their workshop and to meet our guide for the trip, Corey. We picked up the bikes, which were Suzuki DR650s with some modifications for the trip, including a long distance high capacity fuel tank and carburettors tuned for the high altitude running. We then set off for an initial shakedown introductory ride before departing properly the following day. We rode out from the workshop on the back streets before finding some dirt roads and a few barriers to ride around. Finally ending up on a shiny cobbled road that took us up to the hill overlooking the city. Up there is a big Jesus, which is also known as the Cristo de la Concordia, the Christ of Peace, and it's on San Pedro Hill, which is to the east of the city. It's based on the Christ the Redeemer in Rio, and is the second largest statue of Jesus in the world, and it was the biggest when it was built. It's 34 metres high, with arms spanning nearly 33 metres. After that it was back down the hill, over the cobbles, and then finally back to the hotel garage, where I nearly lost the front wheel on the metal drain running down the middle of the ramp. Luckily I managed to catch it, and we were all set to get some rest for the night before leaving the following day. On day one we travelled from Cochabamba up to Sucre, the constitutional capital of Bolivia, and a rise of 300 metres up to 2,810 metres, which is about 9,200 metres above sea level. It was the second longest day on the trip and was all done on roads, and though 339 kilometres isn't a huge distance for many bikes, on a single cylinder 650 40 horsepower enduro bike with one of those long thin enduro seats and no screen on knobbly tyres, it certainly felt like a long way. We set out from Cochabamba on Highway 7. Through the town of Punata, where it appears that filtering past vehicles stopped at checkpoints is just fine. If they don't stop you, it's eyes ahead and keep on riding. We then rode the first of many twisty miles along Highway 23 that climbed up and out through the countryside to the town of Aquile before joining the Route National 5 for the final stretch to Sucre. It was an awful lot of tarmac, but a good way to cover a lot of distance to the Altiplano in a single day. Unfortunately, I hadn't quite worked out how long my GoPro batteries would last, so the video stops just short of arrival in Sucre, but I'll certainly get that right from day 2. Probably. So day 2 is a much shorter day at only 168 kilometres and just over 4 hours of riding. About half the ride was on road and the other half off. We set off south on Route National 5, climbing up to the Altiplano with the final destination, the 500-year-old city of Potosi, at nearly a mile higher at an altitude of 4,090 metres, which is about 13,400 feet above sea level. first stop was a short trail off the main road to see a wooden suspension bridge over the Pilcomayo River. The bridge towers look a little bit like castles, and though this used to be the main crossing point for the river, the bridge doesn't look terribly safe. It's fine for pedestrians, but there's been a lot of wash underneath, which has undermined the foundations of the supports. Even when it was still in use as a road, if buses had to cross, they would often ask all the passengers to get out. The bus would drive across without them and then they would rejoin it after walking over the bridge. Luckily, we didn't have to cross that bridge on the bikes, so instead we went back up to the main road and crossed on the modern bridge, which is also the border from the Chuquisaca department over to the Potosi department. We were waved through without having to stop. After the town of Milares, the road climbs nearly a vertical kilometre from 2,200 metres up to the Altiplano at 3,200 metres, over 12 glorious twisty miles. In Europe, if you get up to 3,200 metres, chances are you're on a mountain pass and at the top of a mountain looking down. In Bolivia, instead of being at the top of the mountain, the landscape flattened out and we'd arrived at the Altiplano. The road then became fast and sweeping as the scenery changed and became more and more like a desert, until finally, just after the town of Betzanos, we turned off the paved road and onto our first trail, where I just learned just how terrible my off-road riding was and how much I had to learn. Luckily, the others were quite patient and waited for me a few times, either on purpose or as the result of a slight navigational error. After crossing a couple of streams, passing a few small buildings, at least one donkey and a cow, we rejoined the road and stopped for lunch in the town of Jackie. The final off-road stretch was a turning off the road near Negro Tambo, where there was more trails and surprisingly one car before finally meeting a shepherd and his flock with some alpacas. My GoPro batteries lasted the day, however on this final off-road stretch my GPS tracker battery died, so I don't quite have a full track for the day, though eventually I worked out how to make both batteries last week. Shortly after the alpacas, we rejoined the main road on the outskirts of Potosi. Arrived at the hotel early in the afternoon. I was quite exhausted and could feel the altitude. I also felt a bit daft wearing my Stelvio Pass 2,757 metres altitude t-shirt. It's quite high for Europe, but in a city where the children go to school at nearly a mile higher, it's really not that impressive. We had an afternoon free, during which Joel and I visited the Cerro Rico mine, guided by a former miner. We were told that there would be dynamite, coca leaves and rubbing alcohol, which sounded like it'd be a huge amount of fun. It's actually a pretty harrowing thing to do. I've done a separate video which will be available on my channel and on the Bolivia playlist. That's it for part 1. If it's been interesting, please like and subscribe to see the next part of my journey. Thanks for watching.